Every time you post a transaction from your Bank Transactions tab in QuickBooks Online, you are making a decision that, whether you intend it to or not, is one of the biggest factors in determining whether or not you are duplicating your income and expenses. And that is the difference between categorizing a transaction or matching it. So, without further delay, let's go ahead and dive into today's topic and discuss how these decisions ripple out into the rest of our books. So in order to access our Bank Transactions tab, we are going to go to Accounting, and then Bank Transactions happens to be the first option that pops up. Now you can see here, I have all of my transactional data for a month in here. And so we can start to look at areas where we might want to match or categorize transactions. So first things first, let's look right here. We can see there is a whole column dedicated to match or categorize. And we can see right here, we have a little toggle switch for each of these, okay? So what happens when the toggle is automatically set to categorize? Well, basically what that means is that QuickBooks didn't find anywhere on our books a transaction that it thinks might match the transaction that is showing up on our Bank Transactions tab. If we see it toggled over to match, that means that somewhere on our books, usually in the accounts payable or accounts receivable process, but sometimes in other areas, there is a transaction that matches up with what we are seeing. So QuickBooks suggests it as a match because we don't want to duplicate these transactions. So let's go ahead and look at what this actually looks like in practice, okay? We can see right here, I have a bill from Smart Office Supplies for $5,590. And I have a payment going out for $5,590. And it says office supplies in the bank description. But if I expand it, it says Smart Office Supplies. So this is an example of a very high confidence match, right? Not only do we have Smart Office Supplies in our bank description and on the bill that it's matching, but the amounts are identical and unique. $5,590 is probably not an amount that I'm going to be seeing occurring in my books a lot. So QuickBooks offers it up as a match. Now, let's look at a couple different things here. First, if I match this transaction up, what's going to happen is QuickBooks is going to match the payment to the bill. It is going to complete the accounts payable process for me by recording a payment against that bill. And this transaction will show up in my bank register in QuickBooks Online, okay? That is really, really nice. And it's fantastic that you can match to a bill instead of a bill payment, because it means that you don't have to necessarily go in and record a bill payment for every single bill that's being paid. Now, a couple things to keep in mind here. First, this is a very clean-cut example. I have a bill and a payment, and they both match up exactly. So QuickBooks offers it up as a match. But things can go a little bit awry if it isn't a high confidence match like this one. Now, let's also consider what would happen if I toggled this over to categorize, okay? A couple things to be aware of at that point. If I am changing the offer that QuickBooks has, and don't get me wrong, trust but verify is my constant mantra, because QuickBooks, while usually pretty good about offering up matches, is not always 100% correct. So it is incredibly important for us to be able to review this process and be able to choose categorize if that is the better option. Okay, now it is not in this particular instance, but if I were to click on categorize and then say that this was an office expense to Smart Office Supplies, I would be duplicating that expense on my books. And that's something that we want to be very, very cautious of, okay? Now, like I said, this is a match. We can absolutely go ahead and match it. But before I do, let's go ahead and take a quick look at our accounts payable report so that when I do match it up, we can see what is truly happening behind the scenes. So if I go to reports and then standard reports, And then if I select Accounts Payable Aging Summary, I'm going to see that I have an invoice for smart office supplies for $5,590. Okay, now let's go ahead and go back to that Bank Transactions tab and let's match this transaction. Okay, now let's go back in and check out that report. So again, back to standard reports here, and then back to our Accounts Payable Aging Summary. And we can see now we don't have anything on our Accounts Payable Aging Summary because matching those two transactions up told QuickBooks that we were resolving an outstanding bill from a vendor. Okay, now let's go ahead and look at this on the Accounts Payable side. I'm sorry, we just looked at the Accounts Payable side, the Accounts Receivable side. If I go back into my Bank Transactions tab, I'm going to go and look and see if I have any matches for an incoming amount. So in order to do that, I can actually make life a little bit easier on myself, and I can filter the types of transactions I'm seeing down. So I'm going to filter this down to only money in transactions. When I do that, I am left with only my deposits for the month. Okay. Now, this is one of the reasons that it is very, very important before you start adding transactions, before you start categorizing or matching or anything like that, for you to be familiar with both your accounts payable and your accounts receivable aging reports. Okay. Because I actually have a transaction on here that really should be matched to other transactions, but QuickBooks is not offering that as an option. So let's really quickly go and look at my accounts receivable report. Again, reports, standard reports, and then into the accounts receivable aging summary. So I can see right here, I have two outstanding amounts, $5,080 from Jared Simmons and $3,570 from Grace Holloway. Now, we could drill into each of these, and sometimes we might find that this is actually multiple invoices that are making up these total amounts. But we want to be focusing on these totals, okay? Now, if I go back to the overall report, that amount that is owed to me is $8,650 in total. Now, let's go ahead and go back to my Bank Transactions tab and look and see. And sure enough, I have right here a deposit for $8,650. Now, the bank description actually says check deposit, and it gives the names of the people whose checks I deposited. Unfortunately, a lot of banks are not quite this helpful. This is a training file. This is a sample file. This does not represent money that is moving around in the real world. I create this entire world for specific examples. So it is telling me that these checks were from Jared Simmons and Grace Holloway. And since the amount matches up with what's showing on my accounts receivable report, I can safely guess that these are their checks for paying those invoices. But we can see QuickBooks does not offer up a match. And basically that's because we have multiple transactions occurring in our books that come together to make this particular transaction. Now, there are a couple different things that I want you to keep in mind here when we are dealing with a process like this. First, we can always toggle over to match and then find the transactions that match up with the transaction that I have on my books. And we can see here, I have these three invoices, the one from Grace Holloway and the two from Jared Simmons. And those do, if I mark them all off, come together to equal that $8,650, okay? And at this point, if I wanted to, since the difference is zero, I could hit match right here and have these transactions added to my books, okay? There is another way that I can go about this though. I can actually go in, receive payment against these invoices, collect it all into a single bank deposit, and then match that one bank deposit with this transaction. Now, you might be asking, why would I actually want to go and walk through all of those extra steps to get to this exact place that we got to in a matter of a couple of clicks? Well, I'm actually going to go ahead and show you really quickly. If I hit match right here, let's go ahead and look at our bank register and see how this transaction actually shows up. So I'll hit match. And now we're going to go ahead and go to our bank register, which, by the way, if you're ever wanting to go and look at a bank register in QuickBooks, you can either do so by going to your chart of accounts and clicking View Register on the account that you want to review. But if you're already in your bank feed and you're already in the bank account card that you want to look at, you can just click Go to Bank Register at the top of the grid here. Okay. So I'm going to click Go to Bank Register. And let's go look at June 10th. And in fact, we don't have to scroll very far to see that we have these 3 different transactions all being recorded on separate line items to get to that overall $8,650. Okay. Now, here's the thing. This is not a problem if everything has been recorded exactly correctly. But there will be an issue if you have, for whatever reason, an invoice that has a slightly different amount than what was paid, or a bill that is for a slightly different amount than what was paid. I actually just came across this issue in a set of books working with a client. They had entered a bill for 40 cents more than they actually paid the vendor. It was just a fat finger error. It happens all the time. But that meant that when they went in to reconcile their books, the account was off by 40 cents and they couldn't figure out where it was. Now, a couple things with that. First, they had this exact instance happening where technically they had matched a transaction from their bank transactions tab, but they had matched it to multiple bills from the vendor. So it wasn't as simple as going, oh, that's supposed to be $8,650. And it is $8,650.40. We had all of the individual line items showing up in the bank register. So we basically had to go line by line through the statement and line by line through the reconciliation window to find the discrepancy. And that was time consuming, okay? So if you know absolutely 100% for sure that this match is exactly as it should be, you can by all means just match in the register like that, or in the bank transactions tab rather. But know that that is going to split this transaction up on your bank register. Whereas if I had gone through the full accounts receivable cycle, received the payment against the open invoices, then batched it all together in a bank deposit, and then matched the bank deposit, this would show up as a single line item, which is how it's going to show up on my bank statement. So understanding that and understanding the differences in how things will ultimately show up on your books is very important. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Holly from Accrual Mistress Bookkeeping and Consulting. I hope you found this helpful. If you did, please don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you have any questions, please leave those in the comments below. I'll be sure to get back to you.